She was kidnapped from the Vatican 40 years ago. Shortly after leaving the music school, the 15-year-old girl was kidnapped. The mysterious disappearance becomes world news. For 4 decades, her family has been trying to find her and find out the truth about what happened. This is a story that will make your hair stand on end. It's a story in which a kidnapping will highlight the relationship between the Italian Mafia, the Catholic Church, and Pope John Paul II himself. It's a story that will make the father of the 15-year-old girl on his deathbed utter the words, "I was betrayed by those I served faithfully." This is the story of Emanuela Orlandi. Vatican City is the smallest city-state in the world. A country within a country, resembling a hamlet with only 444 people living in it. At midnight, the gates of the Vatican close to outside visitors, and the locals sleep peacefully. Emanuela Orlandi's family are part of those residents. She has 3 sisters and a brother, and her father has worked in the administration of the Catholic Church for decades. He has faithfully served as many as 3 popes: Paul VI, John Paul IV, and John Paul VI. On May 13, 1981, at St. Peter's Square, an assassination attempt was made against Pope John Paul II. Mehmet Ali Agca, 23, who was part of the Turkish terrorist organization, the Grey Wolves, was captured on the spot and sent to custody. Agca's name and this assassination attempt also played a key role in the kidnapping of Emanuela 2 years later. Emanuela plays the flute, piano, and sings in the school choir. 22nd June 1983 was another summer day when she prepared to go to her music lesson. Before leaving, she asks her brother Pietro, who is 8 years older, to drive her to school, even though it is not very far from their home. However, Pietro's girlfriend at the time had complained that she wasn't getting enough attention, so he sends his sister off to go alone. At 5:07 p.m., Emanuela calls the house phone and tells her sister Federica that a stranger has given her Avon promotional materials and offered her a job. A short time later, Emanuela heads to a nearby bus stop because she had a 7 p.m. appointment at the Vatican with her youngest sister, Cristina. Emanuela's classmate, Maria Grazia Cassini, sees her at the bus stop, but will later say that Emanuela didn't get on the bus because she was in a hurry for an appointment. Perhaps to meet the same man who gave her the Avon advertising brochures. This is the photographic profile of the man investigators were looking for in the first days after the disappearance. It was made on the testimony of a traffic cop who saw her with a man apparently about 35-40 years old. Several decades later, Emanuela's brother Pietro would discover the true identity of this mysterious companion. Probably you're waiting for me to tell you who he really is? I'll do that. But first, subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend. At 11:00 p.m., the family of Emanuela goes to the police station to file a report. But the police officer on duty says too little time has passed for them to start a search. Upon seeing the girl's photo, he adds ironically, "She's not that pretty, relax." Or at least not enough to be kidnapped. She must have escaped on her own. All night, Pietro and his cousin roam the streets of Rome trying to find Emanuela, but there is no sign of her. In the morning, they are back at the police station. The investigation begins, but instead of unraveling, the knot seems to get more and more tangled. The phone calls. In an attempt to find some clue, Emanuela's uncle pays for a newspaper ad and leaves a contact number in case anyone can help. The first significant call was made by a man who says he saw a girl with a flute and Avon brochures. However, her name wasn't Emanuela, but Barbara. On June 26, 1983, the Secret Service arrived at the Orlandis home and began recording all phone calls. The second key call was on 28 June 1983, from a man who identified himself as Mario, who claimed that Barbarella was selling Avon products and that she regretted that she would not be able to sing at her concert. This was a sign to the family that Mario was indeed seeing Emanuela, because very few people knew that at her upcoming concert she was supposed to sing, not play the flute. Despite these clues, for 10 whole days, the investigation did not yield any results. However, Emanuela's family made a move that will put their daughter's name in the world news. All of Rome was plastered with posters bearing Emanuela's face and asking for information. No one could ignore these posters. They were so impactful that on July 3, 1983, the Pope mentioned Emanuela in his speech to the faithful and seemed to imply that she had been kidnapped. So, why the police at this time was investigating if Emanuela has run away from home? One phone call on July 5, 1983 would totally change the focus of the police and start the years-long untying of the mysterious knot. On July 5th, a man with an American accent calls the Orlandis home. The American, as the anonymous is becoming popular, plays an audio recording on which Emanuela's voice can be heard. The American states that Mario and Pierluigi are his accomplices, and that they will release Emanuela if the Italian government releases Ali Agca. Deadline, 20th of July, 14 days later. If that doesn't happen, Emanuela will be killed. This sends the story into the news all over the world. The fact that the kidnappers shared their demands 12 days after the kidnapping is highly unusual in such cases. Why they wait so long? Also, the terrorist organization Grey Wolves had no connection to Italians at the time, and the forensic evidence suggests that the other two callers, Mario and Pierluigi, were 100% Italian. Something doesn't seem to add up. Well, every next minute of this video will shock you more and more. A few days later, to prove that the Vatican girl was really with them, the kidnappers sent a photocopy of her music school report card, as well as a note in her handwriting. However, this proves that Emanuela was with them, but not that she is currently alive. 3 days before the deadline expired, on 17th July 1983, Pope John Paul II once again mentioned Emanuela in his speech and called on the kidnappers to release her. Never before had the Pope intervened so directly in a civil crime. The next day, July 18th, the perpetrators plant a new piece of evidence for the Orlandi family that will make their blood chill. July 20th, 1983. The last call of the kidnappers. They give a few hours for Agca to be released before killing Emanuela. However, Ali Agca remains in prison, and the phone calls stop. The distressing lack of news prompts Emanuela's father to send a message to the kidnappers asking them to mention if his daughter is still alive, and if not, at least to reveal where her corpse is, so they can bury her. On December 24th, 1983, Pope John Paul II made a surprise visit to the Orlandi family home. He told them that Emanuela is a victim of international terrorism and that he will do everything in his power to bring her back. The Pope also offered Pietro a job at the Vatican Bank, although he had no relevant work experience. Emanuela's father continued to work faithfully for Pope John Paul II. They even talked often, but never about Emanuela's disappearance. After the Pope's visit to their home, Ercole Orlandi never asked questions about his daughter because it was, quote, disrespectful to ask your superior. Despite the family's immense pain, the Pope never gave them any further information about the case. International terrorism was the only explanation the family had to settle for. However, journalist Andrea Purgatori is looking for the truth in other places. According to his high-ranking source in the Italian Secret Service, there is no international terrorism. It was rather an attempt to hide some big secret of the Vatican. Andrea wrote about it back in late 1983 in the newspaper Corriere della Sera, where he was working at the time, and after the article saw the light of day, his editor said he no longer needed to cover the case. Why Andrea was dismissed? 10 years without any news. The following 10 years were really painful for the family. There were no news about Emanuel until 1993, when the police show them a picture of a girl from a hostel in Luxembourg, who they claim has a chance of being Emanuela. The Orlandi family went to the Luxembourg hostel in question, but the moment the mother looked the girl in the eyes, she realized this wasn't her daughter. After this event, another 10 years pass without a serious clue leading to the discovery of Emanuela. In all likelihood, this is one of the reasons in 2004, Ercole Orlandi, Emanuela's father, said on his deathbed that he had been betrayed by those he had served faithfully all his life. In April 2005, Pope John Paul II died, and in his will, ordered his secretary Don Stanislaw to burn his personal notes, but Don Stanislaw did not do it because he believed they were too important. Pietro Orlandi subsequently tried for more than a decade to gain access to his notes, but the Pope John Paul II Foundation always refused. On September 12, 2005, however, a clue appeared, after which the truth about Emanuela's disappearance began to become clear. A local radio station received the following message: "Look who is buried in the Basilica Sant'Apollinare," and the service that Renatino did to Cardinal Poletti at that time. Renatino real name is Enrico de Pedis of the Banda della Magliana, the Roman Mafia. He was murdered in the street in 1990 and then buried in the Basilica Sant'Apollinare. This is extremely strange, because there are buried great Italian artists and some of the most respected Romans. The basilica is owned by the Vatican. Why does a gangster get such a prestigious burial? Emanuela's brother Pietro began giving interviews in an attempt to pressure the media for new revelations, but the police, the Secret Service, and the Vatican remained silent. Unexpectedly, however, a witness appears whose testimony will turn the case from international terrorism into a domestic crime. June 23, 2007, journalist Raffaele Notariali discovers De Pedis's boyfriend in the 1970s, Sabrina Minardi, who claims shocking things about the case of Emanuela Orlandi. A year later, Sabrina Minardi also gave official testimony in which she stated that on the day of the kidnapping, she and Enrico De Pedis escorted Emanuela Orlandi to a black Mercedes with Vatican license plates. A few days later, De Pedis ordered Minardi to hide the girl in her parents' house in Torvaianiki, where Emanuela stayed for 10 days, after which they moved her to a house in Monteverde with large basements. Most of the time the girl was drugged, and a woman took care of her, bathed her, gave her haircuts, etc. The police discovered that the house Sabrina described did exist, and more interestingly, that it had been bought by a woman connected to the Della Magliana gang. They also found a secret room, hidden behind an extra wall. But what is the connection between the Mafia, the Vatican, and Emanuela? According to the testimony of Sabrina Minardi, Banda della Magliana financed high-ranking members of the church. Furthermore, Minardi claimed that she personally carried bags full of money to hand over to Monsignor Archbishop Marcinkus, head of the Vatican Bank. In the 1980s, the Cold War still divided the West and the USSR. The Solidarity trade union in Poland was one of the most serious anti-communist movements in Eastern Europe. The Vatican and Pope John Paul II, who was born in Poland, had an interest in the collapse of the Soviet Union and in helping Solidarity, but the Roman Catholic Church is not allowed to help political movements financially. So probably the Vatican made a dark deal with the Roman Mafia. The head of the Vatican Bank turned to Roberto Calvi, who at the time was laundering money for many mafiosi through his Banco Ambrosiano. The key point, however, is that Roberto Calvi's bank is subject to international control, while the Vatican Bank is not. The probable money laundering scheme is as follows. The Mafia give cash to the Vatican Bank, which no one can inspect. The Vatican Bank then sends it to shell companies in the Bahamas owned by Marcinkus and Roberto Calvi. Once it's in these companies, the money is almost laundered. All that remains is to transfer it back to the Vatican Bank, which transfers it to Banco Ambrosiano, and voila, the Mafia now has legal money. Some of the money in the bags that Sabrina Minardi claims to have repeatedly carried to Marcinkus will go to finance the anti-communist trade union Solidarity. So because of that deal, everyone wins. The Mafia launders its money, and the Vatican finances the anti-communist movement. However, when you make a deal with the Mafia, sooner or later, the deal falls through. On June 5, 1982, Calvi threatened the Vatican with a letter that would reveal that the Vatican had used Mafia money to fund Solidarity. 12 days later, Calvi is found dead in the River Thames. The official version is suicide, but an investigative experiment proves that most likely this is a lie. $16,000 in various currencies were found in Calvi's clothes, who found his death just below Blackfriars Bridge in London, an area where Catholic monks had lived years before. According to some investigative journalists, this murder was intended to send a message to the Vatican. Who was the sender? Or could it all just be a coincidence? Here's another one. Emanuela Orlandi was kidnapped on the very day Pope John Paul II landed in Poland for an official visit. After Sabrina Minardi's testimony, Emanuela's brother made a number of attempts to force the opening of Enrico de Paita's grave in the Basilica Santa Pollinare. All failed. This eventually happened on 14th of May 2012, but no evidence related to Emanuela was found there. According to Pietro, however, the photographic sketch of the man who accompanied Emanuela in 1983 is entirely consistent with de Paita's. According to journalist Gianluigi Nuzzi, the reason for this unexpected decision is that the Vatican and the Italian government made a secret deal. The police are removing de Paita's corpse because it brings shame to the Vatican, and they are giving evidence about Emanuela Orlandi to the authorities in Rome. On March 18, 2013, Pietro and his entire family's hope of finding Emanuela alive perished. You can see the newly elected Pope Francis greeting the crowd in St. Peter's Square. When the head of security sees Pietro approaching the Pope, he says something in his ear. Seconds later, Pietro asks Pope Francis what happened to Emanuela, and he replies 2 times that Emanuela is in heaven. Where did Pope Francis get this information from, and why the Vatican haven't shared it with the Orlandis yet? What else is the Vatican hiding in this case? In 2012, the VatiLeaks scandal broke, and numerous documents came to light exposing Roman Catholic Church officials of corruption and homosexual scandals. Investigative journalist Emiliano Fittipaldi proves that the Vatican is trying to hide everything that happened to Emanuela Orlandi. Fittipaldi obtained through a source in the Vatican a cover letter, OT 197 pages dated March 28, 1998, which may prove that Emanuela lived until 1998. The title of the document is Expenses Relating to Emanuela Orlandi. It is clear from what is written that Emanuela was moved to London to a girls' hostelry very strongly connected to the Vatican. Her upkeep was paid for from 1983 to 1997. The expenses incurred were worth $21 million. On November 1, 2019, retired Italian Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, 78, and still living in hiding in an undisclosed location, gave a bombshell interview with Italian journalist Aldo Maria Valli. Vigano revealed, for the first time publicly, that he had received a remarkable phone call late in the evening in late June 1983, while working in the Vatican's Secretariat of State, where he worked from 1978 to 1989. Panciroli told Vigano that an unidentified man, speaking Italian with a foreign accent, had just called the Vatican press office to say that Emanuela Orlandi, a 15-year-old girl who lived with his family inside Vatican City, had been kidnapped. The man on the phone, Panciroli said, had set forth specific conditions for obtaining Emanuela's release. This may prove that Emanuela's kidnappers actually made their demands immediately after the kidnapping, and the first phone call to the family's home, which occurred over 10 days after the kidnapping, was about distraction. The Netflix series hints at an even darker scenario that may lie behind the Vatican's desire to cover up the truth about what happened to Emanuela Orlandi. In the finale, we see an interview with a close friend of Emanuela's at the time, who says that a few days before she was kidnapped, Emanuela was scared and told that a man very close to the Pope was bothering her, in the sense of sexually assaulting her. More recently, the Vatican reopened the case of Emanuela Orlandi's disappearance, 40 years after a 15-year-old girl vanished on her way home. Criminal prosecutor Alessandro Didi will be working on the case and has gathered a wealth of relevant evidence that makes the case worth revisiting. Pietro Orlandi said after his interrogation with Didi that it was the first time anyone had listened to him so carefully. Hopefully the truth about this kidnapping will finally come out and the Orlandi family will find some peace. Let's hope the following Italian proverb proves true. No matter how much you try to keep a secret, the truth always comes out in the end.